recording. We are live on Facebook. Absolutely wonderful. So again, welcome, Dr. Fred Feldstein. I was professing my love for you, my roommate, always will be my roommate. And we're learning how you went from chiropractor to a transformational coach. And that's really important. And then I have some other things I will add along the way. I am looking forward to having some fun. So, Fred, we are in school together. We are doing chiropractic. We are elbow deep in human anatomy and physiology. We're having an incredible time. We graduate. The world is our oyster. And along the way, you say, yeah, we got to have something more. And you become this transformational coach. What happened?
Well, it actually kind of just found its way to me because, after we graduated, I opened up an office in New York, in Queens, and I started practicing just like you did and seeing patients and, having chiropractic miracle stories, getting all kinds of people well with all kinds of, pains and, people who couldn't get pregnant. I, was able to help them restore the nerve flow, to help them stories. And for the first, I would say 10 years, that's what I did, and one day, I guess over the course of time, I started working with a health and environmental company. And one of our colleagues, someone that we graduated with, actually he graduated a year after us, Michael. I met him at a seminar in Las Vegas, and he was there representing this company. And I remember him telling me, oh my gosh, this is an amazing company. And they sent me 1,500 new patients last year. And my eyes opened up. I'm like, I'd like 1,500 new patients to help. And, yeah, so, listen. So I did, and it was a really cool company, and they had all kinds of, natural health products way ahead of their time, because this probably was back in 1997. So he needed somebody to basically lecture, and educate, New York. And he asked me to be that guy. And I was like, all right, fantastic. But he did a brand of chiropractic that I didn't do, just a little bit more esoteric, a little bit more, more energetic work, more emotional release work. And I really didn't do any of that. So I flew out to California, and I remember wanting to see how he was incorporating this, business and his chiropractic practice, and how he was, able to merge the two. And I said, listen, these people that, I'm lecturing to, and I would lecture to 150 people, on an evening, and, it was great. It was, kind of a rush, they would always ask me, oh, do you do what Dr. Cohn does? So I'm like, no. But I do my own brand. And so when I went out there, I said, so what do you recommend that I do? And the first thing that he said is do NET. What's NET? NET stands for Neuro Emotional Technique. It was an emotional release technique. Never had experienced it, didn't know what it was. So he actually sent me into a treatment room with one of his associates, and she started doing muscle testing. And, back when we were in chiro school, we took the 100-hour AK course, and we used to laugh about it and joke about it. Lanny, our other roommate, got really into it for a while. But we had some other really good friends that were really into it, but I never really connected to it. So she started muscle testing my arm, and she was asking my body questions. And I could not, for the life of me, control the strength of my arm based on the questions that she was asking. And I was looking at her, I was just like, this is bizarre. And literally within 5 minutes, she found an issue that was not a physical issue, but was an emotional issue that I had been experiencing and living for the last 4 years. It was kind of deep. It was almost like I lived a soap opera story, and it's too complicated to go into, but needless to say, there was a lot of drama surrounding it, and it was energized, and I thought I let go of it, but obviously I didn't, because she found it. And basically what she found was that I was holding resentment involving this issue, which I was holding in my gallbladder about this situation. But it was my emotion, my stuff that I was holding on to. And she released it. And, I have to preface it by saying that this situation actually caused my entire family to have a very big split. I was very close with my family, and for 3 or 4 years, nobody talked to anybody based on, this situation that was going on. So it was intense. But when she released it, I felt like this weight. It just just lifted. And I just felt lighter. I had no idea how it was going to affect my life or how anything was going to change. But I just knew something drastic happened. So I was so amazed that I actually looked at the seminar calendar, and there was another seminar 2 weeks later, and I flew back to California because I said, I need to learn this. And then, I learned Neuro-emotional technique. It was intense. It was very different than what I had ever done. And I didn't use it a lot in the beginning, but what had happened was I started using it for my patients that I was having issues with, that had chronic issues that I couldn't always help right away. And I remember the first time that I released an emotion on somebody where it was a drastic shift. It was a patient of this doctor that I worked with, and I was covering the office. And this 30-year-old young man walks in literally every day, and I'm watching him because he was seeing my friend who we shared the office with. And every day he was walking in with the cane. And at 30 years old, I'm thinking, what's going on? Well, I'm covering the office. He comes in, and it just doesn't make sense. Either my friend, who's a great chiropractor, is missing something, or he needs to twist and think a little bit out of the box. So I asked him what was going on. He said he just lost his job. And I'm like, oh, and then the light bulb kind of went off. I'm like, oh, I think this could be a situation where I could use NET. So I actually had him come back during my lunch hour because I didn't want to open up a Pandora's box. I had no idea what was going to happen, and I had a full office. So he came back lunchtime, and I found that he was holding fear about how was he going to pay his bills because he hadn't worked, and he was holding that energy of fear in his bladder. And I don't know if you know Louise Hay's work. She's written books, and she talks about emotions and what organs they're connected to. So, a lot of it was based on hers, but, a lot of these AK doctors, created, different emotional things. I released it, and he had a 75% immediate improvement in the pain. And I didn't even adjust him. And I'm like, wow, that was unbelievable. I gave him a homeopathic remedy to support the release. He came back the next day, and he was literally, it was almost all gone. Now, the fact that his emotional overload from losing his job and fear of not being able to pay his bills loaded onto his lower spine still indicated that he had an issue in his lumbar spine, but he didn't understand that, and I wasn't good enough yet at communicating the fact that, he still had that issue. And so because he felt better and he judged how he was and how he felt, he didn't come back again. I'm not sure that my colleague that I worked with is extremely happy
with that. Yeah.
But you know what? He had a miracle, and he did well. And then from that, it just kind of progressed. And probably the next big transformational thing that happened was the same chiropractor that I worked with said to me, "Hey Fred, do you know the Callahan technique for phobias?" And I'm like, "Nope." And I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, Doris, who's this 65-year-old black woman who's been a patient in his office for 20 years, told him that she had a caterpillar phobia, and she wanted to, he was like, thinking that maybe I can help him." And I'm like, well, I know NET, and I'm thinking how that might actually kind of affect that. So I asked her if she'd be interested in working for a little bit. So she came into my office, and the first thing that I did was I muscle tested the statement. Was, "Dr. Fred, you're not going to show me a caterpillar, are you?" I mean, she was deathly afraid of caterpillars. And I said, "No, Doris, I'm not going to show you a caterpillar." So I muscle tested this statement. Her arm went she couldn't hold the arm up. You know, the technique, you touch different spots on the body, you localize where that emotion is being held, where it's stuck, where it's trapped. I found it was being held in her kidney energy, which was kind of on the side of her, right underneath her armpit. And when I touched that spot and I had to make the statement, the arm went strong. And she's looking at me, and then I said, okay, so we have to validate what emotion. And the emotion that was connected to the caterpillar phobia was dread. So I looked at her, I said, what do you dread? She said, I dread the fur, the hair of the caterpillars. This phobia was so bad that she had never sat on her front porch. She had never walked around her backyard. She had never gone to a family picnic. I mean, it was debilitating. It was incredibly debilitating. And, you know, the first time that I'm doing this, I was a little bit nervous because I didn't know what to expect, but I'm going to just go with the flow. So I clear it. I said, Doris, would you be willing to look at a caterpillar, you know, on a computer screen? Now, normally before this, she would have like said, no way. Because she told me that, you know, she had gone to other doctors and they had tried to do desensitize pictures, and she couldn't even go to the library to take out the books. She was so afraid of looking at the pictures. So she says, yeah, I think I can do it. So I go to Google, and I have like a 19-inch monitor on my desk, and I pick out the hairiest, furriest caterpillar I can find. She looks at it, and all of a sudden, she vapor locks, and tears start rolling, and I'm like, oh no, it's the precursor. She's gonna have a freak out, you know, full blown. I'm getting ready to call 911, get the ambulance, you know, we're gonna have to get oxygen. And she is just looking at it, tears rolling down her face. I'm like, Doris, are you okay? And she's like, yeah. I said, what's wrong? She goes, this is what I was afraid of my entire life. They were tears of joy. It wasn't like fear. It was literally tears of joy that she was actually able to look. She's like, you got to get my husband, Ben. Ben was in the waiting room in the front. So I intercom to the front, send Ben back. Ben comes back. He walks into the room. He sees her looking at a full-blown hairy caterpillar on the screen. He's like, oh my God, and he can't believe it. She goes home. I send her home. I said, you know, you got to kind of test it. You got to see what's going to happen. So I call her later that night. You know, this was a big deal for me because, you know, it's just something that I hadn't done, and there's no answer. So my mind is like, oh, she's in a hospital, and I could just picture it. You know, she's on, you know, in the ER on oxygen. She calls me an hour later, and she was a very God-fearing woman, and she had gone to church. She goes, I apologize. I'm so sorry I didn't, you know, answer or call you back, but I was in church. She goes, but I have to tell you, today was the first day in my entire life that I walked around my backyard, that I sat on my porch. Wow. And this was like literally within hours of doing the work. So I was like, okay, you know, there's something here. And I just asked, you know, God or the higher power, I said, you know, I don't know, you know, just send people who need my help with these phobias. And, you know, asking you shall receive, Michael. And guess what? People just started finding me out of the woodworks. It was just bizarre. You know, and I would get rid of these phobias in one session, and I would always have them go home and test. Then the next day they'd come home, you know, hugging a big dog, and they, you know, were like deathly afraid of dogs. Or one time I remember after one of the releases that we did for snakes, we went to a pet store, and you know, she touched a snake. I mean, it was like crazy stuff. And then I learned another technique, which is called emotional freedom technique, which is a tapping technique, very popular.
Right. I remember you sharing the tapping technique with me as well. Now, I got a question, though, before we go on to the tapping technique, which a lot of other practitioners talk about. You're using terms release, you're using term energy, you're using terms, you know, releasing phobias, right? So what are you going to say to a person that has a lifelong phobia, says, listen, we got to be sitting with the psychologist, not somebody who's going to release it. So when you say, I'm going to release it, or this is released, what are you doing that's releasing it? I mean, that's, if you know, so for me, you know, as you well know, I'm steeped heavy in the science aspect of it. And so even for me, this is a jump, right? As we talked about, I'm trying to, you know, figure how that coincides with what I'm seeing clinically. Yeah. So when something's released, what does that mean?
Okay. So you know how hard I studied in school, and I was very, science,
Yeah.
science. And, for me, this was becoming a very spiritual experience for me. And I really wasn't very spiritual. My spirituality grew as this process continued, but I had to figure out a way that I can explain it in both Eastern and Western philosophies. So the Eastern philosophy, was easy. It was, spirituality, subconscious energy, which you don't see. How do I describe it, or how do I educate someone who's a medical doctor? Well, I talk their language. And so, when you experience an emotion, experiencing an emotion is normal. There are neuropeptides that your brain releases, and those neuropeptides, release into the blood, and you literally excrete them. That's the proper, release. But when it gets trapped and it gets stuck, it can get stuck in a tissue anywhere in the body, whether it's an organ, cell lining, a muscle, which can cause, wherever it gets trapped in, can cause physiologic and functional issues. So basically, when you do this release, it's releasing it at a cellular level, and again, energetically, but also releasing it when it should have been released but never was. A lot of times, the original time of the event goes back years and years. And so sometimes you have to go back and you have to identify when this original trapping of the emotion occurred. A lot of times it'll go back to childhood. That something happened, a trauma, an emotional trauma or a physical trauma, and there's something called a physical emotional shock. So you have an emotional shock of some kind of event in your life, and it creates a resonance, a reverberation in a physical part of your body, and your physical body now is attached to that emotional shock, and you end up having physical issues. So, over the years of doing this, I started to, work on people and releasing these emotions, realizing that it was happening at a much deeper level than, I was doing as a chiropractor. And it wasn't just about the physical anymore. I remember reading a book by John Sarno and thinking, I don't know if you know his book.
I
He's
do
a
know who he is.
psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And he wrote this book. Okay. And he talked about, releasing TMS, tension myofasciitis syndrome. And I at that point, I hadn't really gotten into this yet. And I'm thinking, because we always talk about the triangle of health, physical, emotional, and biochemical, which is your expertise, nutrition, and all of these different things. But a lot of chiropractors don't work on that emotional side. So, they might go to a therapist, they might go to see somebody. But these days, most people that go to a psychologist or especially a psychiatrist, they're being medicated and they're being put on medications, which isn't actually doing anything but keeping their body, at a level of calm, but not doing anything to release the underlying cause of imbalance. So, what I do is to get to the root cause, just like when we were a chiropractor trying to release the root cause of somebody's physical back pain. The pain is just the effect, it's not the cause. Maybe it's the twist of that vertebrae, putting pressure on a nerve, or, maybe, what you, do in your expertise in your field, improving somebody's nutrition, if they have digestive issues, because the digestive pain or bloating or, whatever they have, that's just the effect. So it's the same thing on an emotional level. And then, it progressed. I mean, it wasn't just even about that mind body. It became about other things. And, I pushed the envelope. What else can I do? And I started working with athletes, musicians, and it became more about performance. And, how can I improve people's performance by releasing their limiting beliefs, subconscious things that happened to them in their past that they still held on to. I'll give you an opportunity to ask, because I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, but Okay, so we know when I'm going to do a manipulation, we know when I'm going to do a soft tissue technique, we know what I'm going to do an exercise, we get that. Well, when you release something, what two questions. One, what are you physically doing? That's number one. Number
Okay.
two, have you had a situation where you release something and now you opened up Pandora's box, right? So now you have to deal with this.
Yeah, sometimes okay, first question. What am I actually doing to release it? So the first technique that I told you about, neuroemotional technique, I was literally studying with acupuncturists who were taking the seminars, psychotherapists, and the creator of that technique, Dr. Scott Walker, he actually showed you two ways to correct it. One was pulse points on the wrist, which were acupuncture meridian points, and you would hold here and literally think of the insulting emotion or the event that was created, and trapped or stuck. And by doing those three things together, it would actually release the issue, the underlying issue. The story that I told you when I had that associate doctor of my friend work on me, literally the resentment was being held in my gallbladder. I held the gallbladder point, which is basically on the right side of my body, under the breastbone. So it's about here, and I'm holding my forehead. And then she tapped on connection to the gallbladder. So that was the release. And as soon as she did it, I just felt this instant poof, like everything that was connected to it, all of the heaviness just kind of went away. I didn't know what it was, but I just know that it was shifted and it was different. And literally within 6 months after that event, which was the amazing thing, sometimes you don't know what's going to happen in the future from the release that day. 6 months later, my family was literally back together because I healed me. So I had wanted like all these people that were involved to apologize, and they were wrong, and really in reality what it is you have to release you, and when you release you, situations go away, which are kind of amazing.
So it's one of those where you help yourself, you can help others.
Help others. Yeah, because you're literally increasing your vibrational frequency. And when you do that, in order for someone to communicate, they have to raise their level up too. So they do it automatically to be able to communicate that you energetically you have now raised your level.
So is this
and it's at a higher level.
Okay, is this relatable to like when you talk about Chinese medicine, like the governing lines and the meridian lines, that type of energy?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of the different techniques that I use are acupuncture meridian, energy points, governing meridian. And one of the releases and one of the techniques that I use is actually using the governing meridian as a release. So a lot of times, and you would ask me about doing, when we were talking about, things that we might want to address, remote distance healing, right? Like, how do you do that as a proxy for someone? This was like an amazing thing. And this was something that was just recent. For most of the 20 years that I've been doing this, it was always in person. But I actually learned that I can do this from a distance, and I can work with somebody on a video chat like this, or on a phone chat, or even connect to their energy and not even be connected to them, on a video or verbally, and tap into their energetic field and release what their subconscious needs to release. And they'll get the release and the shift, which was amazing. But the governing meridian is from the forehead over the head, all the way down the spine to the tailbone. That's the governing meridian energetically, and that's a lot of what the release is. So you actually, if I'm doing it on myself or someone, I can't reach all the way down to my tailbone, so it's just enough to kind of do this, and that's enough of the release.
Okay.
If I'm in person with somebody, I might take my hand and actually go down their spine, from the base of the skull or the neck down their tailbone, basically just tracing their spinal column. So that would be the release. So that was the first question. What is the release and how do you do it?
Right.
And then the second question is about opening up the Pandora's box, right?
Correct.
So, a lot of times what happens is, like with a phobia, a lot of times the phobia will just go away and it's done. But when you get into some heavier stuff, the body has to process it. It has to actually, so you might go through, there's a term in healing called retracing. Familiar with that
No, I'm not.
term, retracing? So retracing is your body unwinds and you go through the symptoms that you got to. If you have migraine headaches, you might have a migraine headache on the way out, but then once that migraine is done, you'll be done with it. It's like you have to actually release the symptoms that are related to the energy as well. And that doesn't happen all the time, but it's a possibility that it could happen. And I always let people know that they might experience some physical discomfort or emotional discomfort, but it's part of the processing out of releasing those things that are stuck. And once they're gone, then they're gone. And they never come back unless you're re-traumatized to the same exact event. And that's another beautiful thing about some of the techniques that I use is they don't, once they're gone, they are literally gone unless you're re-traumatized.
Okay. So briefly, somebody comes to the office, you do your intake, and we briefly discussed about the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience, and we were talking about people who had an adverse childhood event. And later on, we know that these people can be prone to chronic disease, hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, all that. So when you do a physical exam, what is it that you're looking for outside of a structural or a pathophysiological presentation that you need to utilize these techniques?
So Michael, you have to realize that, I am and always will be a chiropractor, but I'm not a practicing chiropractor anymore. So I don't check people from a chiropractic perspective. When I'm working with people, I'm checking them from an energetic perspective.
But what does that look like?
Different.
So when somebody comes to you, what does that, is it I have a problem, or what does it look like when a patient presents, a client presents?
So I might ask them, what is it that they want to address in their life? What is it that they want to improve? They're having a chronic issue with pain. They've been to the chiropractor. They've been to, medical doctors. They've taken medication. They've done this. They've done that. And, the interesting thing is, like I said, for the longest time, I was actually seeing people in person. And then the true gift came to realize that I didn't have to actually see them in person, that I could literally check them from a distance and get the same information that I would if I was in person with them. So there are a lot of energetic healers that literally do this and get amazing results. It took me a while to get to that point, but now that I've done it for, I would say, 2 or 3 years, it's amazing, to be able to do that. So what it looks like is basically asking what questions. I have certain applications that I use. Sometimes if I'm using tapping, it'll be guided. I'll actually take them through the process of tapping. I will use techniques like body code or emotion code, which was also developed by a chiropractor, but they're more energy-based techniques. So I basically ask where these imbalances are in the body, and then the body's responses based on muscle testing that they are getting. If we're in person, that their arm is going to either be strong or weak, or me as their proxy, the answers that I'm getting as their proxy for their for their information. And we get that information, and then we release, whatever those imbalances are that come up.
Gotcha. Okay, so here's a question. I mean, we see this a lot because I treat people who suffered injuries from motor vehicle accidents.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I mean, especially if they've been rear-ended, they're scared, right? There's definitely trauma. There's physical trauma. There's emotional trauma. And, they're getting better, but, now there is this underlying fear, and they're always checking, the rearview mirror. They're, very jumpy. They feel like, every car is coming up on them hard. They feel like they're going to get into another accident again. How do you
Right.
deal with that? And I know there was a case that you helped a client that had injuries after a motor vehicle accident as well. Can you share how we would address that and how you addressed your client that had that?
Yeah, I know the story that we had talked about, and I'm going to get to that, but I want to actually share with you. Neuroemotional technique was created by a doctor in Encinitas, California, Dr. Scott Walker. And he used to do these applied kinesiology workshops. And one of my mentors, Dr. Jennifer LaMonica in New York, had found that somebody had a car accident and was having all kinds of symptoms, but they weren't healing. So what she did, and intuitively, she just, as she did the adjustment, she made them think of themselves being in the accident. And by connecting the thought of the accident and the effects of it and everything that was involved in it, and then doing the adjustment, made all the difference. And then Dr. Scott Walker, when he heard that, he then took it to another level and started, doing his own thing and created this technique, which has been around since the mid 1980s. And I think it was just on Grey's Anatomy, which was interesting. They actually did that technique on Grey's Anatomy, which was really, really cool. Dr. Owen, I don't remember, it was this last season, and he was at a therapist, and the therapist used neuroemotional technique on him for an event that he had, which was emotional. It had to show what had happened was he had won an award, and because the link between the award and his father's death, he never could really take joy in any success that he ever had because it was always connected to a really sad event in his life. So he shied away from being honored for being recognized for specific things because it always connected back to that original time when he was 10 years old.
Gotcha.
And when the therapist released that, literally on the show, it's amazing. I'm watching and I'm going, oh my God, that's the technique that I use. And now it's on like a lifetime primetime show. And then at the end of the show, he was like, yeah, I feel so much better. I think, because he was very resistant. And one of his doctor associates said, you got to see this doctor. I think you need help. And, that was a cool thing.
That is very cool.
Because it, we all want that. It would be great if had, Doogie Howser, DC, right, Doctor of Chiropractic, but we don't get that. So
no, you don't.
So when something like that, gets out into the public, and all of a sudden people were calling and trying to find, NET practitioners, and it was a real boon for not only the technique, but the style and the way they were being treated. So back to your question that, I think you had asked, I had this one patient come in from a car accident. So, I would have treated, I was practicing as a chiropractor at this point, and, when you're seeing someone with trauma, you see them, 3, maybe 4 times a week. There's a lot of physical work you got to do, balancing muscles, joints, postures, getting the inflammation out and doing whatever we do as chiropractors. And we just started talking, and this was like a few years after 9/11, and we got to talking, and she told me that her job, she had lost her job. She was a trader for a bank, and she used to trade for like big money for these, accounts of other people. And when she would do it, she was their top performer. She was getting crazy results, but unfortunately 9/11 hit. Their, office location was down, in Lower Manhattan, and they had to close the office. And so she had no choice, because she lost her job, to day trade her own money. Well, trading your own money in your own accounts is very different emotionally than when you're trading other people's money. And what had happened is that she had, I don't know, I'm not even sure the numbers, it was a long time ago. Let's say $300,000 in her own personal account. She literally, the number went from $300,000 to like $5,000. She almost lost all of her savings.
Oh my God.
Because she was making really bad decisions with her own money, because she was functioning out of fear. When she was working with other people's money, she didn't have any connection to it. So it was easy to make clearer, better choices and decisions and get better results. So then she told me that she's like literally had to start again from 5,000, but she built it back up, almost up to the same point. And so I'm thinking, wow, this is interesting. I said, she can get it from 5,000 to 300,000, but then she can't get it beyond that. So I literally muscle tested what her self-worth was relating to how much she felt she was worth. And the number was basically $350,000, let's say. It was a little bit more than where she was at. So I said, well, we can either kind of break through that and kind of shift your worth and belief system to being worth, I don't know, maybe 750,000, and you'll get up to like much higher because that's who you are now. Or you can stop at 300,000, put another 5,000 in an account, and you'll know you can get it right back up to 300,000, because that's what your worth is. And now you'll have multiple $300,000 savings accounts. So she decided that she wanted to do that one. I did increase a little bit more, but it was an eye-opening experience to see that people literally had identities and belief systems on their own value. And it happens with people that go for jobs too, like asking for raises. Oh, they don't think that they're worth that, or, in order to make a certain amount of money, they might have to like take time away from their family. So, there's like this push-pull, and, the whole thing about emotional release work is being in a state of neutrality. Not that you prefer good or bad, but just being neutral to either one happening. And then that's where the power comes from. Just like if I work with a phobia, the reason why I use the statement, I'm okay with caterpillars, is because okay is a state of neutrality. You don't particularly love them, even if you were okay with them. I don't particularly like caterpillars. They don't scare me, but it's like, I don't love caterpillars, right? But this woman was debilitated by them. But the minute that she let go of that and became neutral to it, the power came back and she was able to live her life. So it's the same thing with anything,
Right.
And you literally test semantics, you test statements, words, beliefs, and that's where the power comes. That's where the shifts come.
So we talked about, phobias. We talked about a person who was injured from, motor vehicle accident, and then, the job was affected. What about peak performance? So let's talk about like musicians and sports people, right? So I want to get better at my game. I want to get better at, playing my instrument. How does this technique help that?
Okay. So I had a patient who was worked for Queens College, and he basically ran the choir at Queens College. So he was the conductor for the choir. So he knew some of the things that I did, and he knew that I worked with people for performance, and he asked me to come in and do a workshop for the students there. So I did this workshop. There were like maybe 20 to 25 young adults, but these people are really like high-end musicians. So I was going to go in and work with these people on performance anxiety. So I asked, who here, by a show of hands, has performance anxiety when they have to get on stage. And these are all people that do this professionally. I mean, they're going to school to get additional degrees, but these people have performed in, like all kinds of, impressive situations. And they all raised their hand. So I said, well, what do you do? How do you handle that when you feel anxious? And I was amazed by some of the answers, honestly. I did not expect what some of these answers came back at me as. Some people said that they take beta blockers. Some people say they do shots. And I'm like, wow, that just really amazed me that this is, like really high level people who have performance anxiety, and to keep that level of anxiety down, they'll just do a shot or two before they go on stage to perform, or they'll take beta blockers because it'll balance out their heart rate. I was stunned. So I invited 2 or 3 people up on stage. One in particular, who was a jazz guitar student, had significant issues with performance. And I, just asked, his body muscle tested what the issues were, released a few things in front of, the other people there. And then I sent him down and I worked on someone else. Well, within the week, I get an email from his teacher, who's a professional jazz guitarist who, is his instructor. He's like, I don't know what you did with him, but that was the sickest, craziest improvement I've ever seen in any of my students in 1 week. And he was so impressed that he literally decided to book sessions with me to improve his own performance. Nice. And what was interesting is that I'll share this with you because it kind of continues with performance. He had inherited a guitar, a jazz guitar, from his cousin, who unfortunately was killed in the Iraq War. Mm. And he never felt comfortable playing this guitar. And what I found was when he touched the guitar, just held it and connected to it, his muscle went down. He couldn't hold it. And so I actually had to release the grief that was associated with the guitar in order for him to feel better with it. And then I also did a technique that I do with not only musicians and their instrument, but athletes and their tool of choice, whether it's a golf club or a baseball bat or running sneakers. It's called Harmonization Technique. So I actually connect, I have them hold what they use, and I connect the energy of a non-animate object that they use to their body's energy, and I make the harmony between the two things connected. And then I've had professional golfers who I've done this with tell me that it's a completely different club. They can't believe it's the same club. They feel the head, and professional golfers know their clubs unbelievably. Sure. And there's one particular golfer that would keep every season, because he would get new clubs, he would call me, okay, we got to do the golf club harmonization technique, and I'd have to go and I'd have to check all the clubs. And, not every club was, out of balance. It was maybe 1 or 2 clubs. Mm-hmm. And I was asked, what club are you not hitting well? Oh, it's my 3-wood. Okay, so I would literally muscle test the 3-wood, and then I would see, where he was imbalanced on it. What was it? Was it the look, the feel? Was it the weight? And I would balance all these things, and then completely different club. Completely wow. Club. So, energy is an amazing thing, and most people, I know it's a little bit scary because it was scary for me. Something like you can't see energy, right?
So that's one of the things I have. So we can't see it. How do I, you test it? There's no marker for me to look at.
Well, the marker is the muscle test, because that is the well, if you call it objective or subjective, either way, it's where we get our answers from.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're like reading the body in essence.
I am reading the body, absolutely.
Okay.
And
gotcha.
So the energy that runs your body. So I always tell people, what is the difference between your body when it's alive and your body when it's not? And it's the electrical energy that runs it. Think about any diagnostic test, especially sure. If you have heart chest pain and you go into the hospital, the first thing they're going to do is an EKG. It's an electrical test.
Right.
If you have head trauma, the first thing they're going to do is put leads on your head and they're going to do an EEG and check the electrical integrity of your brain waves. You know, if you have radiculopathy or neuropathy and you have numbness in your toes, they're going to do an EMG, you know, and check the flow of the electrical energy down the nerve into the foot to see if there's any impedance of that electrical flow. So these are all electrical tests. So if those tests are the basis for most of how we check function, we know that electrical energy is important. And then, you know, now we just have to use the techniques that, you know, we have to be able to find out where those electrical imbalances are.
Okay. So let me ask this. So we talked about the ability to release these phobias on people, the ability to help with post-traumatic injury, the ability. I'm sure you work with post-traumatic stress disorder as well quite a bit. That would make sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure on that one.
Absolutely.
And we talked about peak performance. So now I want to talk about something that nobody will come in and say, but it's so important. We see this in my world, and that's limiting beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's limiting beliefs around, I can never feel better again. I'm always going to feel this way the rest of my life. I don't feel good about myself. I'll never be successful, right? So it's not so much I hurt somewhere, but mind-wise, I'm stuck, right? So that's a lot of what people say. I'm stuck. I can't seem to get out of this rut.
Yeah.
How does this work? What are you seeing with this technique to help these people come above and beyond that?
I mean, I literally can test up to 100, you know, beliefs, negative or positive beliefs, to see which ones might be imbalanced. And depending upon what the challenge is, you know, in your world, I'm sure you deal with a lot of people who have issues with weight challenges. So, you know, there's the physical aspect of losing weight, you know, eating clean, eating healthy, you know, eating the right foods for their body. But then there's the underlying emotional stuff. You know, there might be things that, you know, your mother or father said to you when you were younger that's stuck in your mind. And now it literally is a subconscious limiting belief that you can't be something other than you are. Like, I'm a fat person. You know, and so if you identify as being, you know, an overweight person, how are you going to ever shift to being someone who's less than overweight? So there's a very big mind-body connection to that. You know, obviously you have to have the physical tools. You have to, you know, cleanse the body, detox, eat well, take probiotics. I mean, all of these, you know, things that you teach every single one of your patients and clients to do. But if there are underlying belief systems that don't allow them to, you know, like I said, like, I can never heal, you know, they might have a no will to heal energy, or a no will to be healed energy, something that is literally stuck at a subconscious level, and they don't even know that it's happening because it's not in their conscious mind. And that's the beautiful thing is that we go into the subconscious to find out what these issues are and release them at a subconscious level. And Michael, the subconscious is the driver of the conscious mind. So even though you might not realize that it's going on, that programming never stops. The conscious mind, you can trick, you can kind of like push it away and it's not there. But the subconscious, it remembers everything you've ever done in your entire lifetime from the time that you literally were conceived. And I've actually worked with people that have had issues that emotions that were absorbed from their mother during the last trimester of pregnancy. fears that they had, and that they absorbed, and it wasn't their emotion, it was their mother's emotion. Or I'll work with an inherited emotion that goes back generations, that, the DNA genetically keeps being passed on, very interesting stuff. But when you release it, it's incredibly powerful, and you just don't realize, how that affected you until you don't have it as part of you anymore. And then, so a lot of times I'll release an inherited emotion from someone whose grandmother, who's no longer alive, pass it on to their mom, who then pass it on to them, and then they pass it on to their children. And the really cool part is when you release an inherited emotion, it releases it from the whole chain. Again, I know it seems like woo out there, but it really is amazing, and it does, and it also releases from your offspring that you have passed it on to as well. So
Right.
It releases and de-energizes that completely.
Right, and we know we know that genetically passed down, those effects can go from parent to grandparent to parent to child. So we do have a question here that somebody asked. They said, "Awesome job tonight." So somebody said that, and somebody asked, "Is this type of Rubenfield synergy? Are you familiar with that? Is this kind of the same thing they're asking?"
I honestly don't know that.
Okay.
Technique. There are a lot of techniques. Rubenfield, no, I don't know it. So I'm not familiar with it enough to say if it's similar or not. So I can't say.
Okay. So Alexander technique, Feldenkrais. I mean, is this all?
No, very different, because those are more,
postural based.
Yeah, postural based. I mean, you can work with somebody on posture by releasing emotions, because, if someone has issues with self-esteem and confidence, it's going to show up in posture.
Sure.
Somebody might be depressed and they might take on, somebody actually might have poor posture. It goes both ways. So somebody might have poor posture, and then because the poor posture drives the depression, and vice versa, you can be depressed creating poor posture. So
Right.
You need to break the cycle and the link to that.
Okay. So believe it or not, we're coming up on an hour already, which is crazy. So I have another question though. So, I see a lot of gut patients, a lot of patients that suffer with autoimmunity. One of the common complaints that we have is constipation. So have you seen that in your practice with those patients who may have not come out and said it right away, they have it, or after you release what you release, or there's something that's emotional around constipation and bowels and movement and so forth that you've helped, from irritable bowel syndrome people that have diarrhea or IBS with constipation? Have you seen that at all?
Absolutely. So if you remember, I mentioned earlier Louise Hay and different organs holding emotions. Mm-hmm. So, the colon and the lung energetically work together. Like colon and control issues, trying to control everything. When you feel like you have a lack of control in your life, constipation is one thing that you subconsciously control. So you have to release the lack of control issues that underlie the constipation. You also have to look and see what emotions are connecting to the colon, because there could be up to 10 emotions that could be connected to the colon. So they're, again, based in, the acupuncture meridian, like water and air and earth energies, fire energies. Each organ and each gland is connected energetically. Colon usually grief, sadness, it's the same thing, colon and lung. But it doesn't always have to be the emotion that's connecting to the colon, because any emotion can lock in anywhere. So if you have weakness and a susceptibility somewhere, and you have these emotions that now become trapped, they're going to go to the weakest spot. Just like somebody who has a lower back issue, and then they get a cold or a flu, they'll feel really achy in their back. Why? Because their back is not as strong as other parts of the body. So the minute that their body gets out of balance, that's where they're going to feel, the issue. So it's the same thing. If you have a underlying colon issue, and there's an emotional issues that you haven't cleared, then working on those emotions that connect to the symptoms relating to the digestive system, the stomach, the small intestine, each one of these organs or the accessory glands have their own emotions that are connected to it. So you just always have to find out what are those emotions that are connected. Sometimes I'll ask the function energetically, the energetic function of the organ or the gland, and I'll come up with a number. And then we'll release and we'll see literally an energetic shift on that percentage. So it's always good to use as a baseline so I can see, what releasing that emotion does in terms of function relative to energy.
Gotcha. Okay, great. So we're going to wind up. My question is, how does somebody get the opportunity to work with you? How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So I'm gonna give you my email address. They can email me.
Okay. And then you'll give me that as well. So I want to repost that as well.
Yeah. So yeah, you want it now or you want it?
Well, you'll just send it to me afterwards. So I'm going to post, make sure everybody gets it.
Okay, fantastic.
So give it to me now, and then we're going to repost it as well.
Okay. So my email address is drickfield4 drickfield4 @gmail.com.
Okay.
And if anybody has any questions, personal, questions, or they like a discovery session to see if something that I do might be able to help them, they can reach out at 631-742-1975. Sometimes I'm doing sessions, so just leave a message and I'll get back to them.
Beautiful, beautiful. So any parting words tonight?
Other than I love you and that, you keep doing what you're doing because you're changing the world, Michael.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the opportunity to share what I do and what I love and feel passionate about. Like I said, it's been a 30-year journey from the time we graduated. And if you asked me if we'd be sitting here talking about stuff that I'm doing now relative to what I thought I was going to be doing, I would say no way.
So, but it's an incredible journey though, right?
It is an incredible journey. And the really interesting part is that, we all have our own journeys.
Right.
And that's the fun part. I mean, you connect to something and you're great at what you do. And, I hope to think that I'm, great at what I do. And, all of the people that we graduated with and, that what they do, and they have their own things that they're amazing and experts at, and that's the beautiful thing, life is just so random, and especially in these times, you just have to stay present and enjoy it. I mean, this whole COVID thing is literally, because of a lot of the things that I do always were me being out in the public, and I can't do that with the COVID situation going on. I've really been developing a lot more sessions with people from a distance and really building that up and helping people. And that's been an amazing gift. So, even though COVID is a pretty overwhelming thing, I look at it as a blessing. And, like I said, that's all you can ever do.
Right. And listen, I know you're busy now. I think, with COVID, I think there's going to be a lot of post-traumatic associated with this. So I think you're going to, have more people calling for sure, because, a lot of people are going to need help.
Lots of fear, Michael. Lots of fear. Lots of people, are going to be afraid. So this, and one of the big things that I'm finding are shared emotions, because people share emotions and you can, share them together.
Right.
So that's a really big thing that I'm finding. People are sharing very common emotions of fear and dread and lack of control and so anyway, I really have enjoyed this.
Yeah, this is
so I
wild.
really get to share a little bit of our rides going to school, and maybe our Barry Manilow.
Well, Barry Manilow tunage.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and hey, so thank you, and I'll bring you way back before we hang up, and I'll bring you back and everybody back. Thank you for loaning me the money to buy my first car in California, that red Ford Fairmont Futura with the plaid seats. Really appreciate it.
I remember. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. All right, hang on. I'm going to end this. Don't go anywhere.